One of the most acclaimed children's stories of all time, Hans Christian Andersen reveals the personal and corporate consequences of leaders becoming so inebriated by the effects of power and position that they become oblivious to the intricacies of the world around them as they exist within a realm of adulterated self-contrivance devoid of truth. In The Emperor's New Clothes, we become acquainted with an indulgent, narcissistic leader who possesses an insatiable drive to elevate himself before his people. His raison d'etre, did I say it right, Doug?
Raison d'etre.
Thank you. I didn't study French.
Okay.
Is being the object of admiration. His reason for existence is being the object of admiration. His disposition contributes to an impairment of the highest order. His appetites perpetuate the law of diminishing returns as he foolishly employs two tailors to fashion him a magnificent garment to provide yet another opportunity to garner the approval and affection of the masses. The con artists indicate that the cloth is invisible to anyone who is too stupid and incompetent to appreciate its quality. Despite the inability of the emperor to view his new garment, he acknowledges its grandeur and concedes to the wishes of the courtiers who encourage him to place himself on display as the centerpiece of a public processional. The emperor, his courtiers, and nearly all of the onlookers reinforce the emperor's psychosis by acknowledging the exquisiteness of a fabric that does not exist. This manufactured reality is contested by the ignorance of a small child who curiously inquires why the emperor is naked. Soon after, the absurdity of the situation is heard throughout the kingdom as the crowd responds, "The boy is right. The emperor is naked. It's true." This was a story that was published in 1873, and I think it's just as relevant today as it was at that time.
Oh, I agree with you. And it's a story that has, on the surface, one set of meaning, and then on the deeper, once you delve into it, it has multiple meanings. And I think that it's a really good way to introduce our concept today about the indulgent leader and what that means. And I think most people probably are familiar with that story.
I think they are. They may not realize whether they, if they're familiar with the idea of solipsism. In many cases, they probably are. But it's just a term that we don't use very often. And I think that we will probably have a two-part series on this topic.
Right.
So we're going to probably get through about half of it today. So I think that it's important just to think about the concept of leader. When we hear that word, it evokes all kinds of ideas and thoughts, emotions maybe, in people. And one of the things, though, that I think is very common is there's a public elevation of the concept, in terms of a leader, of otherness. And it's often perceived by other people, and in many cases, it may be perpetuated by the leader himself or herself. I'm studying Egyptology.
I know.
As you know, Doug.
Oh, yeah.
And right now, and through the University of Manchester. And one of the things we're looking at right now is just the idea of the pharaonic king, and just all the energy and expense that went into promulgating this cult of the leader. And it was that this leader is so completely other, and in many cases on the level of God.
Well, and one of the things I'm reading a book right now that deals with two great leaders, but everybody has a little bit of an opinion about the negative part of what they did, and that's Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. And even they did not escape the solipsism of what was going on around them because of the way they were treated. And so it has manifested itself historically, Tony, in a variety of great historical figures. And of course, one of your favorites is Alexander the Great. And the same thing happened to all of them. And it's very easy to fall into this trap of self-indulgence, self-importance, and so therefore, the reason for this conversation is for leaders to be a little bit more reflective about who they are, how they respond and act in not only in public, but within the private counsel of their staff, those people that help make meaning for them and their organization. And we live in a time in which I think leadership at many levels, from organizational standpoints of various institutions in our society, American society, is being questioned by the average person. And the average person, you know, doesn't necessarily have all of the background or knowledge to understand why some people react and respond the way they do. And I think that we're in a time in which people are being a little more reflective, but it's, in many cases, Tony, it's frightening to think about some of the leaders that we have. And I'm not talking about necessarily in one segment of our society, but a sort of across the board. You know, you and I have worked with a number of individuals and groups that sort of span the spectrum of functionality.
And I think this issue that you're talking about, I mean, you've alluded to this, it's not something that's new. It's not a new phenomenon.
Right.
And it's something that's been going on since the beginning of time. And what's so fascinating is that it's not something that's necessarily addressed in leadership development education. Right. You know, we both not only have been students of leadership, but we also have been instructors at the undergraduate, graduate, doctoral levels. And this is not something that's typically addressed in the traditional curriculum. And it's so important. You know, a lot of times we look at things through one lens. You know, a person that studies psychology, you know, in school, they have all of these courses that they take, you know, in that one area, and you know, heavy content in that one discipline, and so that's the lens through which they view reality.
Right.
And I think that there's a really big importance of what I call disciplinary coalescence. You know, especially as we look at this topic. You know, it's important to look at things through multiple lenses. You know, I think about our conversations we have. You know, we both have degrees, academic degrees, in multiple disciplines.
Right.
I mean, right. I know that you often, though you've got a history of being an educator, and have studied leadership and taught leadership, at the same time, you often draw upon your anthropological roots.
Right.
I know that when you've done consulting, and you've got all kinds of tools that you use when you harness that. You know, I do the same thing if I'm doing something in organizational leadership or organizational development. I often bring something in that I learned from philosophy or in ethics. And that's kind of what we're doing today. We're looking at this concept called solipsism. And we're going to define that in a moment, but I do want to say that it's very much connected to emotional intelligence, you know, which is something that we've talked about in our previous programs. But in order to understand this idea, we have to ask a question, and it's something that's been asked for thousands of years. And that question is, what is truth? What is truth? We use the word truth probably every day. But do we really ever ask the question, you know, if I believe something is true, what is the process by which I authenticate that?
Truthful.
Exactly.
Right.
Is there an authentication system? Is there a criteria by which I gauge whether or not something is true or false?
Well, you know, I think